Hey, Betty.
Good morning.
How you doing?
Good.
It's been a while since you've been here.
It has.
Yeah, are you doing
stuff? Well, a lot of stuff's been going on, but some of it good, some of it not good, but we're getting there.
okay? All right. All right. Okay, well, good to see you. I mean, you know, a couple of classes, I was kind of wondering, like, where has she been? So, anyway, you never know really what's going on with people. But
yeah, the good. I actually got on vacation for 3 weeks, almost 3 weeks, so that was really good. It was much needed.
Okay. You mind if I get nosy and ask where you guys went?
We went on a Mediterranean cruise.
Ooh.
That has been paid for since 2019, and it kept getting canceled. So it's even better when it's already paid for.
Right. Yeah, and you finally got to go and use it. That's great.
Yeah.
So you were in the Mediterranean. What did you get to go see?
Well, we went to a few countries and went up to Mount Etna, which was kind of fun. It was kind of a hassle because you have to fill out forms to get into any country that you went to. It was really a hassle. Like a PCR test plus 3 other antigen tests along the way, and but we just kind of took it as part of the deal.
Yeah. World travel right now is, questionable, tenuous at best. Because different countries you go into, depending on what's going on, they may have more or less restrictive, requirements for people that, come into the country, and also where you're coming from.
And Italy, you couldn't, if you were on a cruise ship, you couldn't get off the ship unless you were with an organized tour. But if you were just a visitor going and staying in a hotel in Italy, you could come and go as you want, which makes absolutely no sense at all. But, you just got to do what they go with. And France doesn't accept our vaccination things. So you have to apply for one of their vaccination things, which converted to theirs, which we didn't get it until we were on the ship and in France, but a lot of hassle.
Yep. So did you get to see any good art?
We didn't get to, museums were pretty much closed off. You couldn't get in any museum. Saw some interesting art on the ship. Some of it we liked, some of it we didn't like. But other than that, not a whole lot.
Okay. So it sounds like not a great recommendation for time for a world tour, huh?
Probably not. Be better, but then again, when's it all going to end? So, we kind of figured we're just going to go and do it. And the ship had 100% vaccination requirements for passengers and crew. And I said we felt safer on that ship than we do going to the grocery store. So.
Yes, and well, you should. The restrictions for getting on the ship were probably much higher. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, well, it's good to see you back. And
it's good to be back.
Yeah, I'm glad you had a nice trip. And we'll have to talk more about that. Anyway, it looks like we got a few people here. Good morning, everybody. We got Brian. We got John. Brian.
Hey, everybody. Hello.
John. Yeah. Okay. Did I miss anybody? No. Okay. Oh, Eloise. Eloise is here now. Okay. So guess what today is?
Monday.
Monday. Okay. All right. So I'm going to throw you guys a curveball. Okay. I never do that, right?
Never.
Okay. So we're going to watch a video today about some art that you probably never really thought about much. Okay, but it's you know, it's about, you know, some of the ancient art, you know, or semi-ancient art of like the northern Germanic tribes in Europe, and you know, Celts, you know, folks like that. And I think you'd be amazed at some of the art that they produced. And if you look at the time frame when they were producing it, a lot of this stuff is being made kind of at the time of Christ or before, and then to really about 400 years afterward. Okay, is kind of the period. So it's about an 800-year period of time in which he's going to cover some of the art that was being made. And a lot of this stuff is really pretty interesting, you know, and I think you'll enjoy it. Anybody got anything we need to cover before we jump into this?
No.
Don't everybody speak up at once, okay?
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay.
We'll,
So,
we'll get in line.
okay. All right. So we're going to jump into this, and you know, everybody have a cup of coffee?
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay, good. All right, but yeah, you'll find this really interesting. It's, you know, it's a good film, so I think you'll enjoy it. All right. So, there we go. Share. Like that. Go full screen. There we go. And away we go.
The word barbarian is a misleading expression. And the art that goes with it is misleading too. This picture was painted in 1890 by the arrogant French painter, Joseph Noel Sylvestre. It shows the sack of Rome in 410 AD by the Visigoths. The Visigoths were a so-called barbarian tribe. You can't miss them. They're the ones without any clothes on. It's such nonsense. The Visigoths were never naked savages clambering about Rome, destroying civilization. They were pioneering Europeans who produced beautiful art and who achieved important things. It was actually these so-called barbarians who invented trousers. Riding a horse was much easier in trousers. So if it wasn't for the barbarians, we'd all be wearing togas. So this is a film about misunderstood peoples and their misunderstood achievements. About how we've got the Dark Ages wrong again. And about a word whose meaning has been warped by time.
Hey there, homeowners. Do you pay over $100 a month for electricity? If so, there is this new program for qualified home.
It's this word here, barbarian. The Dark Ages go roughly from the 4th century to roughly the 11th. And I've been looking at the art made in these years, trying to convince you that it wasn't dark at all. In this film, I'll be leaping to the defense of the so-called barbarians. The word barbarian actually comes from the ancient Greek. Its original meaning was someone whose language you can't understand, a foreigner. You know, like we say, it all sounds like Greek to me when we can't understand something. Well, the Greeks said, it all sounds like bar, bar, bar. So it was an onomatopoeic word. Anyone who spoke a funny foreign language was a barbarian. The same word, barbara, can be found in Sanskrit, the ancient language of India, where it means gibberish or stammering. And if you're actually called Barbara, like Barbara Windsor or Barbara Streisand, I'm afraid your name means barbarian woman. You, madame, are particularly in touch with your barbarian self. When the Romans took over the word, it came to mean anybody, anywhere who wasn't a Roman. So, the Persians were barbarians, the Indians, the Chinese, the entire non-Roman world. It isn't just this word barbarian that's been demonized and distorted. You open your dictionary and start looking for words with bad, dark ages connotations, you'll find lots of them. Take this word here, Vandal. The Vandals were actually another fascinating and creative ancient peoples who made things like this. But their name's been stolen from them and turned into something dark. Or what about the Goths? Today, Goths are oily punks with dyed black hair who worship the devil. But in real life, in Roman times, the Goths were fabulous international creatives who made the most beautiful Bible I've ever seen. But the worst of these so-called barbarians, these forgotten ancient peoples whose reputation has been trashed by the Romans, the very worst of them were the Huns. Poor Huns. Anyone in ancient history deserves some rebranding. It's this notorious nation of energetic invaders. No one had a good word to say about them. Top historian Jordanes tells us they were scarcely human, a stunted, puny, and faithless tribe. Christian writers were even harsher. According to a Christian cleric writing in Syria, the Huns eat the flesh of children and drink the blood of women. Despite reading bad airport paperback, the Christians were determined to demonize all pagans, and they were particularly determined to demonize the Huns. So we can't trust the Christian clerics. We need to trust the art. And that tells a different story. In the First World War, the British began calling the Germans Huns. It was the worst insult they could think of, but also very bad geography, because the Huns were not from Germany. Exactly where they came from is one of the big mysteries of the Dark Ages. Nobody knows for sure. But it was somewhere out here in the Eurasian steppe, somewhere far away and different. The first record of the Huns in Europe dates from around 376 AD, when a group of retreating Goths turned up here on the banks of the Danube and begged the Romans to take them in. The fleeing Goths had been pushed out of their lands by a nation of nomads coming in from the east. A fighting tribe of whom everyone was scared. Huns were fierce warriors, there's no denying that, but not all the time. Like all nomads, they lived a precarious travelling existence and moved around in small family groups, menfolk, women, and goats.
If you've got a pack of hot dogs in the kitchen, toss them in the trash. Do this instead.
The default lifestyle of the Huns was a tinkerish domesticity. And among the splendid Hunnic objects they've left behind, the defining ones are these battered Hunnic cauldrons, preserved in the museum in Budapest. In these robust vessels, the Huns cooked their goats and boiled their water. A man can live to 50, is an old Kazakh saying that still circulates, but a cauldron will live to 100. Something else we know about the Huns is that they loved gold. Oh, how the Huns loved gold. The Hunnic graves that have been dug up, the buried caches of treasure and valuables, reveal such an instinctive passion for treasure. These days, we've lost sight of gold's crazy, hypnotic power and that special relationship it enjoys with the sun. The Incas called it the sweat of the gods. And in the Dark Ages, gold was a substance with a magical presence. And the Huns loved it in a visceral and unbalanced way. In my book, that's a good reason to love them back. Because they spent so much of their life on the move, travelling from pasture to pasture, the Huns had a particularly creative relationship with the natural world. Hun treasure is dominated by exquisite animal forms. In the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, a wonderful piece of jewellery. It's a golden bit of a bangle or a neck torque, like one of these. There's this piece here at the end, shaped so atmospherically at the head with creeping wool. This is gold that nurses an intense symbolic ambition to commune with the natural world, to speak to it and steal some of its power. Steal the power of wool. Another animal that was dear to them was an eagle. They probably used eagles to hunt with, as nomads of the steppe still do.
The world has changed. You don't need to sell out of galleries anymore. You can go directly to your...
Eagles have a special significance for the Hun. They were ready-made symbols of power and beauty combined. Right across the barbarian world, these garnet-studded eagle brooches became noticeably popular. This powerful new relationship to the natural world was one of the great barbarian contributions to civilization. And then, of course, there was the magnificent Hunnic horse art. The Hun depended on their horses totally, and they loved them deeply. But of course, They made sure their horses looked suitably splendid too. These are the remains of a full-length Hunnic horse ornament, fashioned delicately in gold and studded so generously with precious stones. Lucky is the horse who got to wear this. The Huns would ride into battle with wolf skins pulled down on their faces, screaming demonically in a deliberate effort to get inside their enemies' heads. Now this was dark psychological warfare, very sophisticated. One of the reasons the Huns were so easy to demonize is because they looked so strange. They practiced ritual deformation, and their skulls were deliberately misshapen at birth. Infant Huns would have their heads tightly bound, so they grew into these uncanny and elongated Mekon shapes. And on these deformed heads of theirs, the Huns would balance spectacular crowns of unimaginable preciousness. But the big question is, where did the Huns get their gold? They were nomads, not miners. Although they were busy tradesmen, you'd need to trade an awful lot of goat skins, the amount of gold left behind by the Huns. They didn't trade for it. The Huns got their gold more directly, straight from the Romans. Because their bows were so lethal and their horsemen so skilled, the Huns were soon operating a protection racket across most of the Roman Empire. What they'd do is invade somewhere, or threaten to invade somewhere, and then demand large quantities of gold to go away again.
Hi, my name is Sandy Chaikin. I grew up believing in the American dream. Work hard, save your money, and one day.
The Romans, cowardly diplomats that they were, preferred to pay them than to fight them. And by the time the Hunnic Empire was at its largest extent, the Huns were receiving £2,500 of gold coins from the Romans every year. £2,500 of gold every year to melt down and turn into art. A few tribes of nomads raiding along these Roman borders could never pressurize the Romans into giving up these enormous quantities of gold. So we need to forget this image of the Huns as a tribal horde sweeping across Europe, because they were something much more sophisticated than that. This is a map of the Hunnic Empire under Attila. It's the bits in orange. And just look at the size of it. All this was Hunnic. This wasn't a bunch of nomads on the make. This was a rival empire, a new superpower of the Dark Ages, turned up to take on the Romans. I've kept Attila back, because the moment you mention him, the story of the Huns takes on a satanic glint. All the Huns were demonized by history, but Attila was demonized most of all. The exciting thing is we actually know a lot about him. A Roman diplomat called Priscus was sent on one of these diplomatic missions to negotiate with the Huns, and he's left behind a vivid account of his journey. This gentleman here is building a replica of Attila's palace on the actual site on which he thinks it actually stood. So Janos, when did you first become interested in Attila?
I bought this land 20 years ago to breed horses. That was when we came across the history of this site. Priscus, the Byzantine ambassador, visited Attila in 450 AD and describes how he found his way here. And he definitely identified this place as the site of Attila's palace. That's why we'd like to erect a memorial to it here by constructing a wooden palace.
Janos's palace will be created in timber, exactly as Priscus describes. It's shaped like a giant nomad's tent, a kind of glorified yurt with two wooden towers rising cockily at the front. Priscus tells us that when he arrived, he was treated to an enormous banquet served on silver plates. And a procession of young women dressed in white veils came out to sing for him. Attila himself was simply dressed and ate nothing but meat on a wooden platter, while the guests were given goblets of gold and silver. What does Attila mean to the Hungarian people? Because for a lot of people in Europe, he has a very bad reputation, but not here. In Hungary, he seems to be thought of more as a hero.
When people say Attila was a barbarian, that's something I reject. It's not something I believe. He spoke 8 languages by the age of 15 and laid Europe at his feet. Someone unintelligent, a barbarian, could not have done the things that Attila did. Only someone blessed with special talents.
Did Attila's palace really look like this? I very much doubt it. But neither do I think Janos's fantasy is more misleading than all the other Hun fantasies about satanic hordes sweeping through Europe. By the time Attila became their ruler, the Huns had created a complex political system. Their huge empire was actually a federation of many nations, a kind of barbarian EU opposed to the Romans, with Goths, Burgundians, Alans, even a few Greeks, all linked together and ruled by Attila. So here at the Kunsthistorische Museum in Vienna, there's something really spectacular I just have to show you. And this was dug out of the ground on the Romanian border in 1799. It was thought to be Attila the Hun's personal dinner service. See why they thought that? Just look at how splendid this is. 23 golden vessels, nearly 10 kilos of pure gold. Today, no one thinks this was Attila's dinner service. The most recent thinking is that it was left behind by Avars, one of those mysterious tribes that emerged from the confederation of the Huns. They obviously had that special relationship with nature too. This magnificent bull-headed bowl is another example of powerful natural magic channeled to gold. This is what the Dark Ages were capable of. This is what makes these times so exciting. That bull bowl has a power to it, an animal energy that you just don't get later on when art loses this connection to the basic stuff of life. The empire of the Huns didn't last long. For a few decades, it rivaled Romans, and then it was gone. Attila, the glue that held it all together, had a taste for young brides. On his final wedding night, he drank himself into a stupor, took his latest bride to bed, and promptly died of a heart attack. They found him the next morning with blood streaming down his nose, what we call these days a rock star death. Within a few years, Attila's empire was gone, torn apart by feuds and incompetence. But the Huns had done their job. They'd punched a hole in the invincible reputation of the Romans. Now, all manner of barbarian was queuing up to pour through it. When we think of the barbarians, we think of hordes of bellicose warriors storming across the plains to attack Rome. But that's wrong. It's more of a migration. Think of those wagon trains rolling across the American West, full of brave pioneers searching for a new future. That's a more accurate image, particularly in the case of another great barbarian nation whose name has been well and truly blackened by Dark Age propaganda, the Vandals.
If you're a homeowner with a $100 or more electric bill, listen up. There is finally an affordable and
According to my shorter Oxford dictionary, a vandal is a willful or ignorant destroyer of anything beautiful, venerable, or worthy of preservation. That's what it meant in 1663, but it shouldn't be what it means today. The story of the Vandals is actually rather poignant. They were basically a nation of Germanic farmers living peacefully in Central Europe until the Huns pushed them out. For a while, they ended up here in Spain until a group of Goths pushed them out of there as well. And the poor old Vandals had to move on again to here, North Africa. In 429 AD, 80,000 people came across the Straits of Gibraltar, crammed onto small boats. A kingdom on the move, looking for a homeland. The Vandals had arrived in Africa. Originally, this word Vandal meant something like wanderer, someone who's looking for something. It comes from the same Germanic root as the English word to wend, as in I was wending my way home from work. And the Vandals were great wenders and great wanderers. The Vandals who arrived here in Africa were led by a formidable king called Gizeric. If you think of the Vandals as a lost people, as Africa as the promised land, then Gizeric was their Moses, leading them across the oceans. They made their way along the North African coast here, attacking cities, collecting followers, absorbing territory, until eventually, in 439 AD, they reached their destination, Carthage. Carthage was the second largest city in the Western Roman Empire. Busy, rich, a crucial trading centre. The Romans depended on it for most of the olive oil they burned in their lamps, and the wheat from which they made their bread. When the Vandals took Carthage, they shocked the Roman Empire. The capture of Carthage was surprisingly peaceful. Gieserich was so clever. He entered the city on the 19th of October, the day of the Roman Gate, Sports Day. Now, the Romans, who were obsessed with sports, were far too interested in the gladiatorial combat and the chariot racing to fight the Vandals. Thus, Gieserich and his Vandal army strolled into the second largest city of the Western Roman Empire, took control of it, and stayed there for the next century. People used to think the Vandals went about destroying and pillaging Carthage as soon as they got here. But today, we know they didn't. The most remarkable thing about the Vandal occupation of Africa is not how much they destroyed, but how little. Later on, angry Romans and Christians writing about these events made sure they blackened the Vandals' reputation, as they did with all the barbarians. But the art that remains from these times tells a different story. To signal their new status as overlords of Rome's most prosperous province, the Vandals did what the nouveau riche always do. They spent money on the arts. Their jewelers were commanded to make gorgeous Vandal bling. Out in the countryside, they built elegant villas for themselves and filled them with superb decorations. That's the Julius mosaic. It's one of the masterpieces of the period. And Julius himself is sitting there in his white robe. He's the man who commissioned the mosaic. No one is 100% certain that this was made just before the Vandals got here or just after. And that's the most telling thing about it. This is how rich Romans lived, and also rich Vandals. Julius's house, where this was found, is shown in the middle, the posh fortified villa. Those domes at the back are the bath houses, the equivalent today of a luxury swimming pool.
People ask me every day, what do I do to look the way that I do? When I tell them it's 90.
All around the villa, there are busy scenes of rural life in North Africa. Up on the left, that's winter. See the people picking olives. That's what you did in winter. On the other side, on the right, is summer. See the shepherds, their summer flock. Those fields of ripe wheat behind them. Down here are spring and autumn. Spring is the season of flowers. And there's Mrs. Julius in her garden, admiring herself in a mirror, while a servant brings her a bowl of roses. They are beautiful, and so is she. On the other side, it's autumn, and there's Lord Julius himself sitting on a throne in his orchard, while a labourer brings him a basket of grapes and a hare he's caught running about among the vines. This is mosaic making of the highest calibre, so imaginative and clever. It isn't just a portrait of Julius and his house. This is a visualization of the perfect lifestyle, a rural dream made real. The message here is how glorious life is when man lives in harmony with nature, when order prevails and the land is fertile and balanced. Welcome to the good life in Africa. Instead of knocking down Carthage, the Vandals set about making it more homely. They put small houses in the huge Roman clearings, and famously, an ambitious new bathhouse was built here by the art-loving Vandal king, Thrasimund. Bathhouses were hugely important in Roman society. They were a kind of social club where people went to chat and gossip, a bit like modern health clubs, except much cheaper. Roman bathhouses had two main spaces: a hot room or caldarium that heated you up, and a cold room or frigidarium that cooled you down. The largest of all Roman bath complexes was here in Carthage, the Antonine Baths, built in the 2nd century by the Roman Emperor Antoninus Pius. These are the ruins. So imagine how big the baths must have been. Long before the Vandals conquered Carthage, the Antonine Baths had fallen into disrepair. So the Vandal king, Thrasimund, built some new ones. We know a lot about Thrasimund's baths because, amazingly, a collection of Vandal poems on the subject has survived. That's right, Vandal poems. The Vandals were particularly keen on poetry. Hundreds of poems written here in Carthage in the Vandal years have survived. This thick body of unexpected literature tells us so much about them. A poet called Felix has left behind an evocative description of Thrasimund's bathhouse. This magnificent monument erected by royal command, where water and fire display their obedience. There were no less than 5 poems by Felix about these great baths. The big idea in all of them is this dramatic contrast between the cool, refreshing springs of the frigidarium and the hot, boiling waters of the caldarium. Here, says Felix, icy spring waters exist harmoniously with flames. Here, the shivering nymph is startled by the fiery bath. Felix's poems were actually displayed all around you as you bathed, as mosaics, so they surrounded you, pushed their way into your thoughts. And as you read them, you were prompted to marvel at this great miracle achieved here by Thrasimund. In the Vandal baths, Thrasimund has achieved the ultimate harmony. Thrasimund has united fire and water. Here we are. Goth, one of the Germanic tribe who invaded the Roman Empire.
You see, the world has changed. You don't need to sell at events and galleries anymore. You can go directly to...
In the lexicon of hate spawned by the Dark Ages, a special place is set aside for the Goths. The Dark Ages are full of nasties, but the Goths are particularly spooky. If you walk down the street where I live in London, in Camden Town, you'll find plenty of modern Goths wandering about. They're dressed from head to toe, in black, and covered in satanic insignia. They're trying so hard to look doomy. And I just want to give them all a big hug and tell them to cheer up. Because if they want to be Goths, they should be like real Goths. Energetic, colourful, inventive, kind of people who did that. Stunning, isn't it? I love the way the mosaic sparkles with all that gold and throws light all round the dome. So exciting. But there's something peculiar about it too, something slightly awkward. That's obviously Jesus up there being baptized, but why is he so pink and flaccid and not very divine? How did Jesus end up like this? Originally, the Goths came from up here, the Baltic coast. They were farmers, successful farmers. But when their population exploded, they made their way south to the Black Sea, searching for better land and better farming conditions. When the Goths moved south, they came into direct contact with the Roman Empire. Their history immediately grew more problematic. It will take me several programs to deal with all the twists and turns in the story of the Goths and their migrations. But to boil it down to its essentials, when they settled here in the south, they found themselves in the way of the Huns coming in from the east. To get away from them, the Goths split in two. And some of them fled across the Danube here and begged the Roman Empire to let them in. And they became the Visigoths, or Western Goths. They settled initially here in France and finally in Spain. But the other ones, they stayed put over here and joined the Huns in the Hunnic Empire. And they became the Ostrogoths, or Eastern Goths. They're the ones who did this. When you think of barbarians, you think instinctively of pagans, don't you? Of godless and violent people with strange and primitive beliefs. Onan the barbarian is hardly altar boy material, is he? Actually, most of the barbarians were Christians, even the Vandals. So were the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths. All of them were converted to Christianity in the 4th century. However, the form of Christianity they were converted to was unusual. The reason why this Christ looks so unfamiliar, and even peculiar, is because he's an Arian Christ and not a Catholic one. Arian Christianity is different. Arianism was a Christian heresy, different form of Christianity, proposed by a priest called Arius in Alexandria in Egypt in the 4th century. And there it was spread across the Roman Empire and then out among the barbarians. The Arians believed that Jesus was different from God. He was divine, yes, but less so. The Catholics believed that God and Jesus, Father and Son, were equal, two different forms of the same great divinity. But the Arians disagreed. For them, God the Father was the one true God. He was the God at the top, and Jesus, his Son, was below him. And that's why the Jesus up here in the baptistry mosaic looks so wimpish. This is a Jesus who's more like the rest of us, less divine, more human. Perhaps that's why the barbarians preferred him. He's less imperial, more like them. This is Ravenna in northern Italy, the capital of the Ostrogoths. Right across the empire, Catholics and Arians distrusted each other, as only co-believers can. But in Ravenna, it was the Arians who held sway. And it was Arianism that created this. It was a bit like the Sunnis and the Shia in Islam. Same religion, different only in its details, but so antagonistic towards each other. The Ostrogoths were led by a formidable Arian king called Theodoric. And it was Theodoric who built this. Theodoric had been brought up in Constantinople in the court of the Eastern Roman Empire. He'd been sent there by his own father as a hostage and educated as a Roman. But he was sophisticated and clever. Having gained the trust of the Roman Emperor Zeno in Constantinople, Theodoric persuaded Zeno to let him come to Italy and reconquer it from another Germanic despot called Odoacer. Theodoric invited Odoacer to a banquet in his honor, and there he murdered him with his bare hands, or so they say, and thus Theodoric made himself ruler of all Italy, based here in Ravenna. Under the Ostrogoths, Ravenna thrived as never before. This is the great Basilica of San Apollinaire that Theodoric built early in the 6th century, and then filled with this spectacular array of mosaics. Up on the ceiling, a baby-faced Aryan Christ performs such a lively set of miracles, raising Lazarus from the dead, conjuring up miraculous fish. So up there is the story of the young Jesus performing his miracles. And on the other side, over there, the other end of the story, Christ's terrible death and resurrection, the Last Supper, the kiss of Judas. Below that, there's this great golden procession, the 22 virgins bearing sumptuous crowns, lined up to pay homage to the Virgin Mary, with Jesus in her lap. On the other side, in a kind of Aryan call and response, the 26 martyrs, dressed more simply in white and advancing in a mighty procession towards the enthroned Jesus. What marvellous religious theatre this is. What vivid and exciting mosaics. And all you pretend Goths in Camden, if you're watching, the real Goths made this. Unfortunately, later on, when the Roman Emperor Justinian reconquered Ravenna for the Byzantines, he set about tampering with what Theodoric had done, removing what he could of the Arians. You see this portrait here? That's actually Theodoric, but Justinian has taken over his identity, and he's pretending to be him.
Michaels has everything to create meaningful gifts and meaningful moments. Shop now at michaels.com.
This, they say, is what's left of Theodoric's Ravenna Palace. You can see it inside San Apollinaire as well, a great golden palace, filled once with magnificent Ostrogoth treasures. There's a museum in Romania, in Bucharest, that's bursting with this Ostrogoth bling. And personally, I'd be happy to put on some shades and just stare at it for the next few days. But we can't, because back in Ravenna, the story of the Ostrogoths has darkened and grown eerie. When Justinian conquered Ravenna, he had all signs of Theodoric and the Ostrogoths removed. And the great mosaic palace is now a ghost town with no one in it. Though if you look very carefully, you can still make out a few of the bodiless Ostrogoth hands that remain. Theodoric left his mark on many art forms, but the one that surprises me most is this totally unexpected piece of Dark Age literature.
The Silver Bible is a Gothic gospel book written in Gothic with a Gothic alphabet. It was written in northern Italy, probably in Ravenna, probably for the Ostrogothic king Theodoric the Great, in the beginning of the 6th century.
Most people imagine that what used to be called the barbarian tribe, such as the Goths, didn't have a literature, but this, of course, is written in the Gothic language.
Yes, and that's very remarkable because we don't know anything about the other Germanic languages, but the Gothic languages is preserved in this manuscript.
Very beautiful to look at. Got these lovely purple pages with the silver writing.
Yes, it's the imperial color, the purple color. And Theodoric the Great, he got permission from the East Roman Emperor to use this purple color. And he behaved and acted like a Roman emperor.
Theodoric, who lived to be over 7.
Based on
deserves to be remembered as one of the great achievers of the Dark Ages. This is where he was buried, his mausoleum in Ravenna. And I can't think of another building anywhere that looks anything like this. What eerie and inventive architecture. I love this thing. It's so stocky and unusual. A unique example of Ostrogoth building, which seems to have popped out of nowhere. And that's just the outside. Wait till you see the inside. Theodoric died in 526 AD and was buried here in this huge sarcophagus, shaped like a Roman bath. I find this such a spooky space, and it's absolutely unique. That roof is made from a single piece of Istrian stone, 1 meter thick, 33 meters wide, and weighs 300 tons. To get it here in Istria, which is roughly where modern Croatia is, they had to load it onto an enormous raft and sail it across the Adriatic. Can you imagine? That cross up above, that's original too. There used to be silver stars all around it. When you looked up in here, it was like looking up the sky at night. There are some exciting stories about Theodoric's death. Some say he went mad after seeing one of his victims inside the head of a fish. Others say he was thrown from a volcano. One thing's certain, the Ostrogoth Empire he created collapsed quickly after his death. Justinian reclaimed Ravenna. The Ostrogoth era was over. So that's the end of the Ostrogoths. But what about the Visigoths, or Western Goths? The Goths in Spain over here. What happened to them, you might be thinking? And what did they achieve? Well, rather a lot, as it happens. This is Palencia in Spain. And what you're looking at is the oldest surviving Spanish church, built in the 7th century by the Visigoths. The Visigoths ruled Spain from around 500 AD to around 700 AD. That's 200 years. But you hardly ever hear about them. You hear about the Romans in Spain, you hear about the Muslims in Spain, but you don't hear about the Visigoths.
I discovered the 8 immortal kings of Samaria lived a total of 241,200 years.
One cruel wag has christened them the Invisigoths, which is very unfair. If you hunt around in Spain, you'll find plenty of evidence of Visigoth achievement, like this rustic annunciation carved into an emerald. And sometimes you don't have to look hard at all to see the Visigoths showing off their Dark Age skills. Like these superb Visigoth crowns, with the name of the king who commissioned them spelled out helpfully for the hard of remembering. Aren't they magnificent? Those Visigoth crowns are not for wearing on your head. They're what's called votive crowns. And they are for hanging above an altar in a church. Like the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths were originally Arians. But here in Spain, they were surrounded by Roman Catholics and quickly adopted the Romanic version of Christianity. And that's when they built these exciting and inventive Visigoth churches. This is the church of St. John the Baptist in Palencia. It's been remodeled here and there, but most of what you see is Visigoth. The story goes that the Visigoth king Recesvinto built this church to thank God for curing him of liver disease. He washed himself just out here in the holy waters of Palencia and was suddenly cured. Recesvinto was on his way north to fight the Basques, so he was particularly grateful for his miraculous cure, and even put up a plaque with the date the church was finished, January the 3rd, 661 AD. Recesvinto's plaque is surrounded by typically vigorous bits of Visigoth decoration. so energetic and busy. Completely unlike anything the Romans came up with. I really like this Visigoth church decoration. When I look at it, I feel as if I can hear the sculptor whistling. There's something so boisterous about it, something real and untutored. It's as if for the first time in art, we're hearing from the common man. This wasn't made by an artiste. This was made by a bloke. Someone with big hands who's speaking to us across the ages. The sheer inventiveness of these Visigoths is so invigorating. I mean, look at these arches. They're special, right? Why are they special? Because they look like one of these. I don't know how much you know about arches, but if you're any sort of student at all, you'll know that horseshoe arches are remarkable. Your bog standard arch certainly wasn't shaped like this. Before the Visigoths invented these, arches were semicircular. They came round like that, and that's it. But these horseshoe arches, they come down to here, and they have a very different effect. Horseshoe arches look wider, airier, taller, more elegant, as if a sail has been unfurled and filled with wind. They're more playful too, less stern. This is architecture doing more than has been asked of it. This isn't just holding something up. This is having fun and looking good. So the Visigoths invented these elegant horseshoe arches. And these were a brilliant barbarian invention. But although the Visigoths invented them, they didn't perfect them. It was someone else who did that. The perfecters of the Horseshoe Arch are the subject of the next film, when we look at the art of Islam. In the hands of Islamic artists, the Horseshoe Arch would create architecture of spine-tingling beauty. It's yet another of the great achievements of the Dark Ages.
Seniors over 65 get stimulus.
There we go. All righty. What'd you guys think of that?
I thought it was very
interesting. Yeah, great.
You didn't think that barbarians were quite so civilized, did you?
I learned a lot of other words too that I thought had a different origin than they do.
Right.
I'm trying to think of one.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, yeah. You know, a lot of the contemporary words that we use, you know, today are, directly, from, that period of time. And let's see, what is it that, here, how do I, let's see, okay. I'm finding my video thing to turn it back on. Okay, yeah, a lot of the language that we use today still, ties back to that period of time. And so
I have to go back and watch that again.
yeah, it's a great program. And then we've already seen the one that he was talking about the art of Islam. And that's one of the things that I wanted to point out. If you look at a lot of the things that the Vandals and the Goths, the Visigoths, a lot of the architecture and things that they created, it sort of has that Middle Eastern feel, right? but it's like, 200, 300 years before Islam ever started. And if you look at like a lot of the mosaic tile and the sort of the flower pattern, and decorative motifs that they use, Islam picked those up as well. And so it just kind of carried on into the Islamic religion from there. And that's really kind of the basis for a lot of the Islamic, art forms. And so, even the calligraphy, even though the calligraphy is in Arabic, the Goths and the Visigoths and the Vandals used Germanic letter forms, which were different than Roman letter forms. And if you're a designer today, they have, whole sets of typefaces that are called Gothic typefaces, and it has a particular weight and look to it. It's bolder and it's shaped differently than what you would consider to be a Roman letter form. And those are in a lot of our typefaces that we use every day. So like, for example, Helvetica is a modern typeface, but it's based off of a Germanic letter form rather than a Latin letter form. And so, there's lots of influences in modern society and life that we really don't consider, but, we picked it up from those cultures and it's been carried on for literally centuries now. So,
So you're just proving to us that everybody steals from everybody in the art world.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. 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 I mean, nothing, it's like ideas, shapes and forms and things like that. They're passed on, from one culture to another. And the more contact that cultures have with each other, the more they share things. In fact, remember the one building that he was sort of, enamored with, which was a tomb, or it was one of the Gothic kings in Verona, or well, whatever that Italian city was. Anyway, if you look at that building and then you go to the next film, which we saw a long time ago, and they were talking about this one particular, again, it was like a tomb, but it was very, very tall, but it was like in Turkestan or something like that, but it had almost the same structure, but it was much taller. But that same roof, that it was kind of this dome shape, but it had these, rectangular squared off projectiles coming out of it. They did the same thing in Turkestan, which was an Islamic building, maybe 300-400 years after that. But again, those forms got, reused over and over and over again in many different places. So, anybody got anything else to say about that film? Any thoughts?
I don't know if I might have seen it before, but I definitely, my daughter has this, it's a series of books, or many books from different countries, like, and it shows the art from the beginning almost of the country. Like Greek, Italy, and Rome, all those, and they show a lot of the artwork and sculptures and fine jewelry and just a lot of things. And some of that jewelry, the Gothic jewelry, remind me of some of the pieces that I saw in this book. It's a picture book, and it's a very valuable picture book. And it's amazing how we came in possession of that book. It was on sale at a consignment place from the library. The library had a lot of things out that they were trying to do, downsizing, and they had this little boutique booth or something at this place, and they were actually selling different kind of books. And I couldn't believe that those books were sitting there on the shelf and nobody had grabbed them up right away. Maybe they just because they look old and they didn't look inviting to them, but inside were beautiful, treasurable photos of artwork from all over the world. You know, if we were in class, I would bring a couple of the books so the students could really see them and see the magnificent things that people accomplished before we got here. You know, that's what's so amazing. And I would always love to have seen how they did those murals or those mosaics way up on the ceiling, you know. So I have problem putting in a light bulb in my house, you know. So it just amazes me how they did all of that.
Well, he talked about that one dome that was made out of a single piece of stone that came from like Hungary, and it was shipped, you know, all the way down to Italy, and it had to go on a raft, you know, and across both the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea to get it there, and then it had to be transported. And then how do you take something that weighs 300 tons in that time and lift it that high to set it on the top of the building? You know, so the thing that, you know, these people did, you know, at that time without a lot of machinery that we, you know, like cranes and things like that we take for granted today. You know, they did these amazing things. And it may have taken them longer, but they, you know, still, you know, a lot of the buildings that they built at that time, we could not reproduce even with modern technology today. We couldn't do it, you know, there's no way. So, yeah, it's, you know.
I think one of our problems is many times is transferring information to different centuries or generations, because the technology, everything is moving so fast. A lot of the basic things we leave behind for the better. So that might be a lot have gotten lost through war or just not be able to preserve it. And every generation has to recreate and come up to some level before they can proceed and get better.
Yeah, a lot of things are passed down for a while, but you know, as technology changes, lifestyles change, things like that. You know, there's always things that are just sort of given up, you know, as not being necessary anymore. But those are still, you know, if you go back and you really look at how they did things, those would be really useful technologies to have. So,
I would think so.
Yeah, but a lot of them are lost. And the one thing, you know, you were talking about, you know, art history books. Probably one of the biggest faults that, you know, we have in modern society is the fact that we focus so much on European art history, and yet we don't talk, you know, very much about, you know, a lot of these other art forms that were going on at the same time. And I have yet to find a really good comprehensive art book that will give you kind of a parallel timeline of what was happening in, say, compared in India versus Europe, Africa, Asia. And, you know, there really needs to be a compilation art book that shows you a timeline so that you really get an understanding of, you know, when these different art periods and cultures were, so you could see how they kind of align and how they influence each other. And that would be a really useful tool, but I haven't found it yet. So, but you begin to put this stuff together, and it's really, you know, history, and particularly how art is reflective of world history is really fascinating when you really get into it. I mean, it's a whole other study all unto itself. Anyway, I'll stop babbling. Anyway, anybody else got anything to say? Any comments about any of this? Okay, I'm gonna be a teacher. All right, Naomi, unmute yourself. Talk to us. I'm trying to get Naomi to talk.
Am I on?
Yes, was she on?
Okay, here I am. Well,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
what were you saying?
So what did you think of, the film?
I have a hard time understanding the people on my computer. You know?
Oh, you mean as far as the sound?
Yeah. But what do I think about the Visigoth? Everybody copies everybody else. Yes.
Well, any of them, yeah.
Yeah. You know, I was away. I was in Florida for my husband's 80th birthday.
Oh, okay.
It was a big thing.
Well, congratulations to him. So he turned
Yeah,
80.
I feel 80 is a big thing. So they made a whole big deal. It was great.
And well, you should. 80 is quite a milestone, I think.
Yeah, that's how I felt. I told my sons that, so they made a whole big deal.
Good.
So it was very nice.
Good. All right. So he's 80 years young.
He was 80 October 30th, but we waited till Thanksgiving
Okay.
to celebrate because the kids from California came.
Oh, okay.
So they made a big deal.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was fun, but now we're tired.
Okay. Probably a good, good result. That means you were having fun. Yeah. Veronica, you got anything to say? You've been quiet.
I thought it was a really good film. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
When you look at the architecture.
Yeah. Did you like the architecture more than, say, like the mosaics or the gold work or things like that? I mean, do you have any favorite parts of that?
Well, the gold work, it was like I could add it to my collection of jewelry, yes. But the architecture was gorgeous. That's what stood out for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Did any of you notice, how light, some of those buildings were, and they had very few windows, and yet they seemed kind of light and airy. Yeah, because that was kind of, when they were building a lot of those, it was kind of before the time of like well, I guess stained glass was becoming a thing in Europe, but like North Africa and stuff like that. Yeah, they didn't have a lot of stained glass, and they didn't have a lot of open windows in those buildings, but they all seemed to be kind of light and airy. That's one thing I noticed about the, the interiors and the architecture. They didn't seem dark, for the most part. Yeah. So I got, let's see. Hadn't talked to June yet. June, you got anything to say? June?
Hello.
Yeah. Do you have any favorite parts of that?
No, I'm just listening.
Just listening. Okay, but there wasn't one part of it you liked more than the other?
Yeah, I like the history or the art history and the artist tech too.
Okay. It kind of, I have an idea, okay, and this is kind of a fun little idea, okay. That, most of that art is based on, like forms from nature, right? Flowers, animals, things like that. And none of those really looked like representational, realistic animals. They were suggestive of a wolf. They were suggestive of a butterfly or a flower or a tree or something like that. And, one of the things you might think about doing just for fun is pick an animal, pick an animal, plant, something like that, and then try to stylize it, simplify it, abstract it, you know, into an interesting design. You know, and you can pick any animal you want, you know, or anything from nature. You know, and just, you know, kind of play with that idea and see what you can come up with. You know, because it's sort of like your experience, you know, with being familiar with certain things, you know, that in nature today will kind of come out in your design. So, you know, that's kind of a fun thing that we could kind of throw at you. That keep you busy and get your brain going. And you know, and again, you know, the goal isn't to make it look just like that particular animal, but you know, you want to be, you know, you want to sort of recognize somewhat what it is, but make it more decorative, more elaborate, you know, than it may actually be. So if some of you guys want to take that on as a little side assignment, you know, for drawing, you don't have to paint it or anything like that. You know, just kind of work it out as a drawing. You know, how would you represent a horse? How would you represent a lion or a cat or a dog? You know, a wolf, whatever. A fish, a bird. You know, you can pick anything. You know, and kind of play with that.
Okay. Charles.
Yeah.
Charles.
Yeah.
The Fox Theater, they're stylized of architecture or decor. Isn't that from back from that period?
Well, no, it's well, it's okay. The actual outside architecture was built to look or represent sort of an Islamic architecture. Okay, but all of the murals and artwork inside is from a period that we call Art Deco.
Art Deco.
Yeah. So that was around, Deco was like, well, it was like from 1920 to about probably, it didn't last very long. It was, yeah, it was probably like really, probably more like around 1900 to like about 1920 or almost 1930. Because once the economy crashed, as they say, you know, no money, no deco.
Okay.
Yeah, that's when we started a new art form in this country called streamlined transportation. That's when stucco came in because they couldn't afford mosaics and, you know, all of these really elaborate materials. And when you go to places like Chicago, New York, LA, all the big cities, even Atlanta, because the Fox Theater was built in that period, it's an Art Deco building. Because the Fox, I think, was built like right around about 1900 is when they built that. So, but yeah, that's yeah. But yeah, it took from Islamic architecture on the outside.
Okay.
Anybody got anything else?
I have a comment. As you said, there's no book or anything that gives a timeline of all the different cultures, but I think it's amazing that each culture was basically developing the same thing, like is that how to do architecture, how to paint, that independently almost that they do or develop the same techniques.
Well, yeah.
Or my out.
Well, and that's one of the things that they're beginning to rethink and rewrite, because, you know, 20 years ago we had this particular viewpoint that people back during the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, and even really into the later Roman Empire were pretty stationary. You know, they didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, there wasn't mobility.
Yeah. And the fact is, now we're finding that, boy, were we wrong. You know, people were very mobile. And in fact, the Roman Empire and people in Rome were in fact quite aware of China and the Chinese Empire, pretty early on, because they ended up getting silk and things like that off the trading routes. Now there wasn't wide, extensive travel, but there was a lot of trade going back and forth, between those cultures. And so they all influenced each other. And the same thing was true with Africa. A lot of materials like ivory and, different like woods and things like that were coming from Africa into the Roman Empire, and then being spread all through Northern Europe, all the way up to, Scandinavia, where the Vikings were, through these trade routes. So, there was really, a lot of stuff changing hands. And so, a lot of those technologies and things, those ideas were shared, from one culture to another eventually, because they all got passed around. So it's, history is one of those things that really interests me. And, people, back in, way, way before even the first century, and if you go back really to about 25, 30,000 years, BC, you're talking about a great deal of mobility, for really early human, cultures, and a lot of interchange of technologies, art, and even interbreeding, between early human species. Now that, they thought, never could have happened, but it did. And now we have genetic evidence, that it happened a lot more frequently than we thought. So it's, human story is a really fascinating one.
Well, it's like you said, in the early, there was mobility all over the globe.
Mm-hmm.
But then to me, it sort of stopped when people started building cities and walling themselves in for protection from other people.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. I mean, yes, like in China, they did like the Great Wall of China, but that wasn't really the first wall that they built. Some of those really, like from the very first dynasty in China, they were putting up walls along, what's now called the Mongolian border, to keep some of those nomadic tribes, like the Mongols and the Huns, out of China, because they were trying to, move into that area. Those people were trying to expand. And, when you leave a grassland with very little rain and you can go into, a very fertile area with, a decent amount of rainfall where you can grow better crops and, raise more animals, that's what they were looking for. They were migrating to these areas. And so when they migrated to those areas, they brought their language, their culture, their art, and then of course, a lot of the ideas that they picked up in China were spread back, to the steppes, and then from the steppes into Europe. And so it kind of went everywhere. There's a lot more exchange than we ever really thought there was. So.
That's why we don't have any pure races. That's why we have no pure races, because we've been and traveling and intermixing since the beginning of time, since we could, since we were able to,
yeah,
and continue to do so.
Right. Well, at one point in very early human history, what archaeologists and anthropologists are now saying is that we had 5 distinct human species all alive at the same time. And we only really have fossil evidence now of about 3 of them. But we know that 2 others existed because you look at the genes in, different areas, and those came from, some other type of human, hominid that, we, populations interbred with. And so we're a mixture of all kinds of things. you know, these 5 different humanoid species. And as far as like what we call race, which is actually ethnicity, because today there's actually only one race. Only one. Human. That's it. You know? You know, now we have different ethnicities. You know, you might be, you know, from African ancestry, Asian ancestry, you know, European, you know, or American, Native. But yeah, there's only really one race. So that's it. We're all human. But yeah, ethnicity and culture, yeah, that's a whole nother thing. And, you know, one of the things, if you go back in anthropology, you know, and archaeology and look back, basically what they were saying is that at one point in time, because of where the human species evolved from, we were all dark skinned. And then our ancestors, because of the areas that they moved to, adapted, you know, and you either kept darker pigmentation if you lived closer to the equator, or you became lighter if you lived in the far north, or lighter if you, you know, lived in the far south. So, you know, the further away you got from the equator, the less needed that you had for, you know, pigmentation in your skin. In fact, you needed to get rid of it so that you could absorb sunlight. So, that tells you a little bit about where your ancestors came from. That's a whole nother thing. Anybody else? Any other thing we need to talk about before we go away? All right. Everybody, anybody have any feelings about doing that little assignment idea? Like it, don't like it, don't want to do it, don't want to mess with it? Crazy about it?
Patrick, you mean? I think it should be optional.
It is optional.
Hold on.
Yeah, it is optional. Yeah, you don't, like I said, you don't have to do it, but you know, it's something to think about. You know, how could you design your own, you know, your own design from nature? Okay.
That's a deep thought.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could take any simple thing. You know, you could take a flower, a house plant, an animal, you know, from anywhere. You know, could be a bird, fish, reptile, mammal, you know, or a person. You know, how would you design some sort of image that would represent, you know, a human, right? In a decorative way. So, lots of different things you could do. Yeah. Anyway, that's about all I've got. Anything else going on in the world with anybody?
I had a strange thing happen the other day.
I'm sorry.
I play records a lot. I had a strange thing happen.
Oh, okay.
And I play records a lot while I'm drawing and painting, and put a record on, and it sounded weird. So I lifted it up, and I thought the needle had gotten some trash in it. So I just touched the needle with my cleaning brush, and the stylus itself just fell off. I have never, ever had a stylus and I got to looking at it, and it sheared off right where it fits into what's called the amplifier, the preamp on the tone arm itself. And so I've never had that happen to me. And I've been playing records for 50 years. And so instead of having to buy a new needle stylus, I got to buy a whole new cartridge.
Wow. I never heard of that either.
Yeah. I've had the needles wear out at one point.
Right.
Yeah, they're out. Oh, no doubt about that.
Yeah,
but I've had lots of
them. One fall apart.
But the stylus that just sheared right at where it enters the cartridge itself.
Yeah.
Did it damage the record itself?
No, everything, all that's fine.
Yeah.
So I'm supposed to be getting a new.
Yeah, did it have made in China stamped on it?
No, this one is made in Germany. I think this Otophone, I think, what is it? Otophone? It's a good cartridge. I mean, it's just, and I've probably got maybe 300 hours worth of records played on it. And they say the last roughly between 900 and 1,000 hours is a good time frame for actual wearing out a needle, the actual diamond itself. But anyway, so that's life in the big city. That's my excitement.
Well, we're glad you didn't ruin your record. That would be a bummer. You know, though those things are coming back big time. You know,
oh yes,
yeah, they're pressing a lot of that music that kind of went away. You know, in the
yeah, I kicked myself for having given away my whole collection and players back when they were dying, supposedly.
Right.
I gave away what would be now some valuable albums.
You're not
I'm with you, John. I did the same thing.
Yeah.
It was interesting because when I was working for Southern Poly, they were cleaning out their library and they needed space for faculty offices. And one of the areas they had was their record collection. And their record collection was the hand-me-downs from Georgia Tech, because Southern Poly used to be a stepchild of Georgia Tech, but Georgia Tech did the same thing. They needed the space, so they gave it all to Southern Poly. Anyway, they were getting rid of this record collection. And I probably was there at the exact right time. I probably got maybe 300 or 400 records from their collection, because myself and a friend of mine that worked there, but actually the guy I worked for, were invited before it was open to the general population to go in and then raid the library for as much as we wanted. And, so that's all I could carry.
Yeah, 300 400 records. That would be a carload. Yeah.
Oh, I had multiple carloads.
Yeah. Well, that would be a big carload. Yeah. Anyway. All right. Well, on that happy note, I guess, you know, the day is a little bit gray. From what I understand, it's supposed to do a little bit of raining this week and kind of get a little bit colder. So it's going to feel a little more like winter by, I think, Wednesday or Thursday. But anyway, hope you guys have a good rest of the afternoon. And I got a few things from Friday's drawing class from you guys. But if you've got more, send it on. Okay. And we'll talk about it tomorrow around about 2 o'clock. Okay.
But if you get it by noon, it'll be included.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. As long as you got it to me by about noontime, I should have time to download it and get it in the queue. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Anyway, it's good seeing you all.
Thank you. This was very interesting today, Charles. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.